Hi, I'm Paul, the Happy Gilder. Welcome to my channel. In this video, I'm going to go over some tips and tricks that should hopefully help you on your journey with sign painting in reverse glass. But before I crack on with that, if you're a fan of gold leaf, sign painting, reverse glass, digital processes and much more, then you're in the right place because that's all this channel's about, and I try to release a video every couple of weeks. Also, if you'd like to support the channel, there's a link to my Patreon in the description. I reward my patrons with a different vector design every month. There's also a link to my Etsy shop where I'm selling some of my designs, and the Facebook group where everyone's kind of sharing their work, asking for advice. It's an amazing place to be. I've learned a lot from being on there, and I strongly recommend, if this is what you're into, that you head on over there and have a look. Anyway, that out of the way, let's crack on with it. Welcome back everyone, and Happy New Year. I know I released a video earlier this year, but it was one that I filmed back in September, I think, so we're not counting that. This is the first video of the year. I hope you're all getting on well with your New Year's resolutions. I'm cracking on with mine. Mine are to get drunk every day and to let myself go a bit. So I think they're going really well so far. This video is going to be a bit of a kind of arts and crafts day where I just want to go over a few tips and tricks from all different sort of areas of, reverse glass and things like that. So all of these things laid out in front of me I'm going to be using today, and just go over something that you might know already, or it might be something that really kind of helps and changes the way you do stuff. So firstly, what I'm going to look at is making a correction on a piece after it's finished. And this has happened to me before, where you kind of finish a piece, hold it up, and it's not till the end that you notice, and you're just a tiny little bit, and you think, oh mate, that looks rubbish, I really want to sort that out. Well, depending on what that mistake is, hopefully this tip will help you sort it out. So I've got this piece here, which if you follow my channel, you might recognise from an earlier video. And what I'm going to do here is show you how to kind of make a micro amendment to the paintwork. And then after that, show you how to just completely start again without affecting any of the gold. And it's really simple. And all it takes is one thing. And that is this, which in England, this is called cellulose thinner. Well, that's how it's spelled. That might not be how it's pronounced. In America, I think it's referred to as lacquer thinner, but it will eat through enamel, or sort of, enamel paint, won't touch the gold at all. And the nice thing is, you don't have to pour this on. You can apply this with a Q-tip, a pipette or anything like that. So what I'll do is I'll just show you how to get started. And let's just pretend, this isn't the best piece ever, but let's just pretend there's an area around about here where I've made a mistake, or there's a fingerprint on it or something like that, and it's ruining the piece. Just want to get rid of a little bit of this paint, ready to start again. So I'm just going to change the camera angle and then show you how to do that. Right, so you buy this normally in, tins this size, 5 litres, and it's cheap. In England it costs about £10 including delivery. So all I'm doing here is just dipping a Q-tip in there, so that's completely saturated. And then what I can do is just start rubbing that over the paint. You can see already that's taking off that paint, and this has been on here a long time. So it doesn't matter how old the piece is, you'll be able to kind of make these amendments using this tip. So just rubbing kind of gently. And I'll tell you where this is really useful. Now, if any of you have used mirror spray paint, like Krylon looking glass, you'll know if you've used it over paint that it's brutal, and you can just spend loads of time, painting something perfectly, and then spray the Krylon on and it completely eats up the paint. Now, a lot of the time that sort of is visible in a kind of, just these grey blotches through. I've had that happen to me before, and this is how I fixed it. Sprayed the Krylon on the back, it messed up my paint. I went over the areas where the Krylon had gone through and then just repainted it. And that worked really well, and it was seamless in the end. So there you go. Got a kind of complete spot where we can just repaint. I know it's not going to work on this piece, but I'm using this because I'm not particularly happy with it, and you can use it as a test piece. But definitely something that every sign painter, reverse glass artist should have in their kit is a tin of cellulose thinner, or lacquer thinner, depending on where you're from. So that's the micro adjustment. Just going to take this outside now, pour this over it and show you how easily this just comes off, and just proving the fact that it won't affect the gold. So, see you outside. Right, so all I've got here is some kitchen roll, a cellulose thinner, and this is my piece. Might have to pour it a bit thicker than usual because I don't know if this paving slab's perfectly level, but what I'm going to do is just pour this over it. And that's it. Let it sit for a little while and then you'll see that paint start to kind of curl up. And when it does, you know, you can start rubbing that away. There's no point jumping the gun and rushing to do it, because the longer you leave this, the better. It'll just start kind of corroding that paint. So I'll just leave this and then I'll start wiping it once I think it's ready. Right, that's looking good. See, that's all bubbled up around here. I hope you can. Let me just move this. So there we go. And you just start gently wiping this. You see that's already, you know, going right through. Now some of this paint's on thicker than the rest of it, because obviously I water marbled this, so that pink is on there hard. That's going to need a few coats. But you know, you don't want to over wipe it, but you can just using water, you know, rinse some of this away. Dab that off the surface and then just start again. And again, I'll get closer in here. You can see that kind of eating the paint up, sort of bubbling it up in areas and just, you know, destroying it really. So let's give that another wipe and see where we're at. There you go. Easy as that. Just pour it on, gently rub it off, and you know, you can get back to just pure gold in no time. So strongly recommend everyone having some of that in their kit, because yeah, you never know when you're going to need to make an amendment. So moving on, next one I'm going to cover is a brush cleaning technique. So just going to open this tin of paint, get a brush and cover it in paint. So this is Right Sublime black enamel. So it's a sign writing paint, nice and thick, so let's cover the brush in that. Now, I've had these sign writing brushes since I started, which I think is, you know, 2015, and they're still perfect. And I think a lot of the reason they're perfect is because I look after them, and the way you clean them is really important, because, you know, these are made of, well, these ones particularly, I think are made of squirrel hair, so really soft, delicate hair, which if you start mushing them into the bottom of a cup or something like that, or really pulling them around and mistreating them, they're not going to last very long. But to get to, what's my maths, 7 years old, still all be there, still going strong, I think this is a decent way of cleaning brushes. So first thing I'll do is, with a piece of kitchen roll, remove all the excess paint. So I'll fold this up a little bit. What I want to be doing is putting it in here, pinching it, but not mega hard, so I don't want to pull the bristles out, and then just kind of squeezing that through like that. So you're sort of pulling the paint out of it and move on to a cleaner bit. Again, hardly squeezing at all, but you can see it's still wringing paint out of this brush. You know, it's best that the majority of the cleaning, you know, or the majority of the paint removal is done before you start using the chemicals on it, because you then don't want to be kind of reapplying chemicals or having to actually mush your brush about, like I'd said before. So we'll do this a few times until it starts to look like it's, you know, just leaving a sort of slight mark on the tissue like this. That's got the bulk of the paint out, so now it's on to how you actually kind of clean the rest of it out. Now I use white spirit for my brushes, and I don't use a lot. So what I've got left in here, that will last me, I don't know, a couple of weeks in one pour, and I won't replace it. So I'll show you how. What what I'll have is a glass, and I'll pour in enough white spirit to submerge the bristles of the brush and a bit more at the bottom. So about that. What I'm going to do, I'm just going to move my camera around so that you can see a bit clearer. Now, with everything removed, I use a clothes peg. Put the clothes peg on the brush and lower that down so that the bristles are in the water and it's not touching the bottom. And that is it. And then you can see already that black paint is starting to run off of that brush. Let me just tilt this camera down a little bit more. Hope you can see that. And that will do that over the next sort of half an hour, and it will literally empty all of the paint out of that brush. So what I'll do is I'll switch it to a time lapse and try and capture that brush completely cleaning itself now. Right, so that's just taken straight out of the white spirit. Haven't touched the bristles or anything like that. I'm just going to run a gentle bit of water on them and just really gently kind of just fan the bristles a bit. Now, the way I'm doing this is I want to make sure if I pinch through that I'm not getting any colour on my fingers. At the moment, you know, well, in this case I haven't. It's yeah, that was sat in there for 15 minutes. Didn't touch the bristles, didn't have to mush it around. And yeah, now that's a perfectly clean brush. And then you can just kind of, you know, flatten it like that, and then that's ready for next time. Okay, so tip number 3 is around the mahl stick. Now you'll have seen me use this if you're familiar with the channel. I generally work with my sort of work flat on the surface, and I use this to lean on so that I don't put my hand in paint. It steadies my hand, and you know, that's the main reason. But it's much more versatile than that. I've covered in one of my videos where you can kind of use a mahl stick to actually guide your hand around letters. But one thing it's really good for is enabling you to draw a straight line. So I'll just show you how that works now, and I'll move over to the cupboard here, and hopefully that'll kind of illustrate it well. Right. So mahl stick is going to go flat against the side. You know, make sure your hand has got something to rest on and that you're not kind of floating in midair like this. So that is sturdy. Looking at my line, that's good. Holding the paintbrush similar to a pencil or however you prefer to paint, this is how I do. And rest your middle finger on the inside of it. And then all you need to do is pull your hand down the mahl stick, and that is your straight line. Sorry I haven't done it with paint, I just haven't got a surface, and I'll get in trouble if I paint my kitchen cupboards. Right, so switching over to everyone's favourite subject now, which is glue chipping. I assume that's everyone's favourite subject because they're the kind of videos that have got the most views. So these are just a few little tips. First one, in my first video about glue chipping, I mentioned how you need to kind of be careful about the sort of shards of glass that ping off. And that's mainly, I mean, it's dangerous because they're razor sharp, but if you've got pets, this is animal skin glue, you know, and they will smell it and they'll want to eat it, and it is full of razor sharp shards of glass. So you need to be super careful, you know, because, you know, obviously if an animal eats a shard of this, it could do terrible damage. So here's a nice little tip. Doesn't cost a lot of money, really easy, and that is using a kind of cake covering. So these things are to keep flies off food, really, in the summer. You know, if you bake a cake and leave it out and then you don't want flies all over it, just have one of these things, pop it up, and then just pop it over the top of your piece, like that. Tip number 2, and this isn't anything groundbreaking, but it's really just about the surface that you're working on. So I've said in previous videos I use a hostess trolley, which is kind of a really old 80s machine or device for heating up food. It's a bit sort of old school, but it's served me well over the years. Now, I've used it so much, and ideally you want to lay your glass piece on this with a tiny little gap, just to make sure all the heat can kind of, you know, activate the glue. what's going to happen over time is the tiny minute shards, what you probably wouldn't even see, will sort of end up in the surface of this. So it's nice to kind of have something in place that means when you put your glass down on to this, that you're not going to risk getting any tiny hairline scratches and stuff like that. So what I use, these are like little rubber feet that people put on the bottom of lamps and well, all sorts of things really, just to make sure that anything that would normally have a hard surface or a hard base doesn't scratch the surface of like wood or glass or something like that. And this sheet, I mean, I don't even know how many are on there. There's hundreds. And the whole sheet costs about a tenner, I think. But if you have a look on here, I'm not sure if you can see in this camera, I've just got them dotted all over the surface of here. And that means if I plonk a big piece of glass on here, that's fine. It's supported all the way through, right down to a little 8x10 piece like this. It means you can just pop it on there, drop it on without worrying, move it around. Not going to scratch anything because all of the kind of things that might potentially be embedded in the surface aren't going to be on these sort of little rubber feet. So again, like I say, not groundbreaking, but handy little things to have. This, you know, like I said, it's a bit archaic and a bit old school. There is a better way of doing this. There's a guy who is in the Facebook group. He's also one of my patrons. His name's Rob, and he's got an Instagram account called Rat Street Boy. And he made one of these, or a chipping box, basically out of a couple of tube heaters. And they're, I don't know, they're super low wattage. I got a couple, plugged them in, and they cost less than 1p per hour to run. So he's made a kind of chipping box out of that. So if you look back through the Facebook group, you'll be able to see the ones he bought and kind of make something like that rather than getting a great big hostess trolley like this. Anyway, that's that one. So on to the next. Right, last one for glue chipping, and what I've got here is just a test piece, and I've just covered it in glue. And sometimes when you've got a whole area covered in glue, you'll find that it takes ages for the sort of vast areas to chip, you know, as opposed to if you've got a kind of letter which is small and thin, you know, that'll chip quite quickly. But something like this, you could end up sitting there waiting for it to chip for ages, and there is a way of kind of speeding that process up or activating it a little bit. Now, sometimes this will work by activating a chip, as in it will chip that area really quickly. Other times it's just to kind of give yourself a sort of starting point. And all you need is a kind of craft knife. And what I'm going to do is tap the surface of the glue. Pretty hard, but obviously not hard enough to break the glass. And what you'll see sometimes is I tap it and then a load of chipping happens. Other times you won't see anything happen, but that little tap will kind of create just the start of a little sort of, you know, fan-like pattern chip, and then it'll chip out from there. So no guarantees that this is going to suddenly start making it chip, but it will certainly work in the long run. So all I'm going to do, pick an area, just hold the glass down and give it a little tap. So that hasn't activated a chip, but you can see what that has done. It's not just put a kind of little hole in it, it's started a very minor sort of chip, and that will chip out from there. So we can do that all over the place. Like I did do a few score lines, but I sort of left it quite bare just for the purposes of this demonstration. So I'm just going to do this all over the glass. Right, so you can fit here, that's quite hard glue. So you can see that has activated that little chip area there, and that will chip out from here. So I'm just going to do that in a few places. Ooh. Not sure if you can see, but that's spread some little hairline cracks out here, so that's the way that's going to go. Still maybe a tiny bit soft over here. Give it a go anyway. Ooh. I'm just going to do that in a few places just to get this chip going. Right, so now I'm going to put that on time lapse so that you can kind of see how that chips. And you should see that all of these tiny little bits that I've made will be the sort of starting point, and that will chip a lot quicker now rather than just waiting for the whole thing to sort of spread across. So we'll just switch to time lapse and show that working. Okay, moving on. Now, I said we'd finish with glue chipping, but I just thought there'd be one more tip now that I've got a piece of glue chip glass that's kind of covered in little bits of glue residue. So, came out quite nicely, but you're still left with, I don't know if you can see this, but bits like that where there's just nailed on bits of glue. Not worried about this because it's just a test piece, but you know, ordinarily you just have these little bits which you can feel when you go across it. Submerging it in the sink is good, you know, but not every piece is going to fit in the sink. So the way you get around that is by using newspaper or kitchen roll, depending on what you've got handy, and you just soak it in water. So I would, in this case, just get a load of kitchen roll, soak it, just put it on this, and then I'd just leave it overnight. And then when you take it off, all of that glue will have softened. You can sort of drag it away with the kitchen roll. You're not going to cut yourself because you put it on quite thick. Same with the newspaper. And, you know, that's just a really sort of easy way of getting it off. And it's quite delicate. You don't have to scratch or scrub or anything like that. So mainly one for a big piece, but, you know, it works for a small piece. But obviously you can just submerge that in the sink. Right, on to the last tip for this video. I've thought of quite a lot over the last few weeks, but if I keep going, I won't get a video out till the end of the month. It's 2 days till Sunday, so I just want to get this out, and then maybe further on in the year I'll do a sort of tips and tricks part 2. But this one is around using the Pounce wheels, and a sort of little tip that was sent to me by one of my patrons who commented on the video and gave me this tip, and it's actually a really good tip for making sure your kind of Pounce goes on properly and you don't end up with gaps in it. So just a little bit of theory behind this. When your Pounce wheel goes into the paper, it's obviously, you know, making a sort of stab, and that will be sticking out. I don't know if that profile can see, but you've basically got a bit of paper sticking out where the Pounce wheel has gone through. When you put that against the wall, that can just squash back down, completely closing that hole. So what you can do, if I just draw a line along here, don't know if you'll be able to see light through this, but there's my Pounce line. On the back there are the kind of little raised lumps that are sticking out, and don't want to push them against the wall, and the Pounce pad could mean that it closes those holes. And the way around that is just a really fine grit sandpaper. So once you've run the Pounce wheel over your pattern or letters, flip the bit of paper over and then just kind of gently rub across the whole pattern. And what you'll see is then holes are then sort of visible from the back. Now, the reason for using a fine grit sandpaper is because you're sort of rubbing it across paper, obviously. I did experiment with this. I started with a 120 grit, and when I was sort of rubbing, it was kind of picking, you know, ripping the paper up a little bit. You could probably go not quite as fine as 800, but I only had a few, and this one seemed to work perfectly. So again, sorry, I know it's a bit rubbish trying to see how that's worked, but rest assured that has definitely worked. Those holes are permanent there. You're not going to be able to kind of push them back in, so you can just bang your Pounce pad all over that or rub it all over it. You'll see every little hole that's been made. So that's that one. Right, and that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please subscribe to the channel and click the little thumbs up icon, and please share it with anyone else who you think might enjoy it. So till next time, cheers.